One woman's worst day became the miracle she never saw coming, when a stranger's kindness cracked open a door to the past she thought was closed forever. Rain pelted the windshield like 1,000 tiny hammers as Claire Harding sat slumped over the steering wheel of her ancient minivan, engine dead, phone at 1%, and her 5-year-old daughter sobbing quietly in the back seat. Grocery bags she couldn't afford anyway spilled onto the parking lot, bread soaking into the puddles, apples rolling out of reach. The ache in Claire's chest tightened like a fist. Widowhood had taught her how quickly life could unravel, but this-stranded with no way to get home, no one to call, and a daughter too young to understand why Mommy was crying, this was a new kind of helpless. As she leaned her forehead against the steering wheel, something tapped her window. She startled, wiping at her cheeks. A man stood outside holding an umbrella, eyes kind but cautious. "Looks like you could use a ride," he said simply. Claire hesitated. The world didn't hand out kindness freely, but something in his voice, steady, quiet, familiar, made her pause. She nodded. That decision would set in motion a chain of events that would reach all the way back to the loss she thought she'd buried and to someone she never imagined she'd see again. Claire could feel the battery giving out before it actually died. The dashboard lights blinked once, then faded into darkness, and the heater gave a long, sighing whir before surrendering to silence. She turned the key again, hoping for something, anything, but the engine stayed quiet. Rain drummed steadily against the windshield, blurring the world outside. Lily, her 5-year-old daughter, sat in the back seat with her coat halfway off, her face flushed from crying earlier in the store when Claire had said no to the juice boxes with cartoon animals on them. Claire let her forehead rest against the steering wheel. Her fingers, still damp from the groceries she'd wrestled into the car before it stalled, gripped the edge of the wheel like it could anchor her to something solid. They didn't have anyone to call. Her last favor had already been used up the previous month, when she'd needed a ride to the clinic after Lily caught a fever that wouldn't break. She'd tried to seem strong then, too, and she was running out of strength. The groceries sat at her feet, soggy bags leaking onto the floor mats. One had split open during the rush to the car, and a bruised apple rolled beneath the seat. Rainwater from her soaked sneakers was pooling by the pedals. Lily sniffled behind her and asked if they were going to be stuck here all night. Claire couldn't answer. In that small silence, something moved just outside the glass. A shadow, then a figure. A man stood there with an umbrella, his expression uncertain but open. He raised a hand and tapped gently on the window. Claire startled, heart racing, as he spoke through the rain. "Hey," he said, voice muffled but clear. "You need a hand?" 3 years earlier, Claire Harding had been someone else. Her days had been marked by shared routines, quiet laughter in the mornings, and the warmth of a husband who held her hand without needing a reason. Mike had been her home. He was steady in a way that made the world feel manageable, even when it wasn't. Their apartment had been small, but it was filled with love. The kind that didn't need decoration or grandeur. It was in the way he kissed her temple as he passed her in the kitchen, in how he always left the porch light on when she worked late, in the way he spoke to her belly when she was pregnant with Lily, as though their daughter could already hear every word. The accident didn't even give her the mercy of goodbye. One moment he was running late from work, the next there was a call, and everything shattered. A wet road, a speeding truck, a moment of bad timing, and just like that, he was gone. Claire had tried to scream when they told her, but her body didn't respond. She had simply stood there, cold and hollow, as the words settled into the space where her future used to be. The funeral was a blur of faces she barely knew, and condolences she couldn't hear. Daniel, Mike's only brother, had shown up late and left early. He barely said a word to her. Something had broken between them. He didn't return her calls in the weeks that followed, and eventually, Claire gave up trying. The grief made everything smaller, tighter, harder to carry. Her world collapsed down to Lily and survival. There was no time to ask why Daniel disappeared, no room for anger when she could barely afford groceries. Raising Lily alone became the only thing she knew how to do. She got a job at a daycare, one that paid just enough to cover rent and stretch the grocery bill if she clipped coupons and bought off-brand. There were nights she cried in the shower and mornings she pretended to be fine so Lily wouldn't ask questions. Her daughter had her father's eyes and his way of laughing from deep in the chest, which both comforted and tore at Claire in equal measure. Every milestone, every skinned knee, every story at bedtime came with the quiet ache of knowing someone else was supposed to be there too. She often thought about the letter Mike never got to write, the goodbye he never said. She imagined the words he might have used, the promises he would have made about watching over them. Sometimes she wrote her own version in her journal, just to hear his voice in her mind again. She kept one of his sweatshirts folded neatly in her closet. It still smelled faintly like him, though the scent was fading. She didn't wear it anymore. It felt sacred, like touching it too often would make the memory disappear faster. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the constant balancing act, making sure Lily felt loved while Claire herself felt hollow, making decisions without someone to share the weight. Putting on a brave face every time she dropped Lily off at school, even though she barely slept the night before. She wasn't sure when she had stopped hoping things would get better. It had happened quietly, like a room darkening as the sun goes down. And still, every morning she got up, packed a lunch, braided Lily's hair, and said, "We've got this," because saying it, even if it wasn't true, was the only way to keep going. Claire cracked the window just an inch, just enough to hear him better without letting too much rain in. The man stepped back politely, as if to give her space. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, tall with a lean build, dressed in a grey hoodie beneath a dark raincoat. He held the umbrella carefully, shielding not just himself but the window she'd opened. "Car won't start?" he asked. Claire nodded, unsure whether to trust her voice. "I've got jumper cables," he offered. "If you want, I can try and get it going for you. Or I can give you a ride home if you'd rather wait to deal with it tomorrow." His tone was measured and calm, without pressure. He didn't look like someone who expected anything in return. That unsettled her more than if he had. People didn't usually offer help without some kind of edge to it. Claire looked in the rearview mirror at Lily, who had fallen into a light doze with her thumb tucked under her chin. Rain clung to the windows in winding streaks. She considered saying no, saying thank you, and that she'd figure it out. But the truth was, she wouldn't. Her phone had 1% battery left, and her sister lived 3 hours away. She hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. "Okay," Claire said finally, opening the door slowly. "Just a ride. We live 10 minutes from here." He gave a single nod and stepped aside so she could get out and unbuckle Lily. She scooped her daughter up in her arms, still warm and groggy, and followed the man to a dark blue sedan parked a few feet away. The car was clean, but not overly so. Practical, like its owner. As he drove, Claire watched him from the passenger seat. He didn't make small talk. He kept his eyes on the road and both hands on the wheel. There was a calmness to him, like someone used to navigating storms without causing ripples. Occasionally, he glanced into the rearview mirror to check on Lily, whose head now rested on Claire's shoulder. He asked for directions softly, following her lead without comment when she guided him down familiar roads. "You said you had jumper cables," she asked. "In the trunk," he replied. "I'll come by tomorrow if you want and try the battery. It might just be a loose connection." Claire hesitated. Letting a stranger drive her home was already a lot. Letting him come back felt like another step. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied, "but it's no trouble." When they reached her apartment complex, he pulled into the visitor parking and waited as she shifted Lily carefully in her arms. He moved to the back of the car and pulled out the grocery bags she had almost forgotten in the chaos. One of the bags had started to tear, and he doubled it without asking, slipping it into her hands. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "I'm Dan, by the way." She paused. The name felt familiar. Common, maybe. Or something else. "Claire," she replied. He met her eyes for a second, then glanced down at Lily's sleeping face. "She's got a good grip," he said softly, noticing the way Lily's fingers were curled into her mother's jacket. Claire smiled almost. "She doesn't let go easy." Dan stepped back, hands in his coat pockets. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said again, then turned and walked to his car. Claire stood there for a moment, groceries in hand, heart unsure. He hadn't asked for anything. He just helped. And somehow, that made him even harder to forget. The next morning, Claire told herself not to expect anything. People made promises all the time. They said they'd follow up, and then life swept them away before they ever did. She dressed Lily for school, packed her a lunch of peanut butter and jelly with apple slices, and tried to shake the memory of the man from the night before. But just after she dropped Lily off and returned home, Dan pulled into the parking lot, his car quiet and dependable. He stepped out with a small toolbox and a thermos. Claire met him outside before he could knock. "You weren't kidding," she said. "I said I'd help," Dan replied, not smiling, just steady. He opened her hood and spent the next few minutes poking gently at the battery and wires. Claire stood nearby, arms crossed against the chilly morning, watching him work. There was something oddly familiar in the way he tilted his head while concentrating, something in his hands. It was small but unsettling. He got the car to start within 5 minutes. The engine coughed, then caught. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I tightened a loose terminal," he said, closing the hood. "Might want to replace the battery soon, though." Claire thanked him again and invited him inside for coffee. He hesitated, but then nodded. While the coffee brewed, Dan stood near the window, gazing out at the street with a look that didn't quite belong to a stranger. Claire studied him quietly. His voice was gentle, but carried a weight behind it. When he smiled at Lily the night before, it hadn't looked like a smile you gave a stranger's child. Later that afternoon, Lily came home from school and pulled a crayon drawing out of her backpack. She had drawn Claire herself, and a tall man holding an umbrella. "This is Mr. Dan," Lily said proudly. Claire took the paper and smiled until her eyes caught on one detail. Around the drawn man's neck was a heart-shaped locket. Claire's stomach flipped. She hadn't seen that locket in years. It had belonged to Mike's brother Daniel. He wore it under his shirt, a gift from their mother before she passed. "Did he show you this?" Claire asked gently. Lily shook her head. "No, I just knew it was there." Claire stared at the drawing long after Lily had gone to her room. The resemblance wasn't just in the drawing. It was in Dan's eyes, in the way he looked at Lily. Not like a stranger. Like someone trying to remember what it felt like to be part of something. She went to her closet that night and pulled down a shoebox filled with photos from the past. There were only a few that included Daniel. In one, he stood beside Mike, both laughing, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Claire held it up next to her memory of Dan's face. The eyes were the same. So was the angle of his smile. She closed the box and sat on the edge of her bed, the drawing in her lap. It couldn't be him. But what if it was? Claire wasn't sure if he would come again. After the car started and the coffee was shared, there had been no plans made. Just a quiet thank you and a long look before Dan slipped out the door. She didn't mention the drawing to Lily or bring out the old photographs. Instead, she waited, folding the suspicion into the corners of her thoughts like laundry that never quite dried. 3 days passed before he returned. Late afternoon, just as the sky began to lean toward gold and Lily was coloring by the window. Claire heard the familiar hum of the engine and looked out to see Dan stepping out of his car, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and his ever-present quiet in the other. "I figured you might still be low on bread," he said as she opened the door. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She let him in, trying not to show how fast her heart was beating. Lily jumped up and ran to him, beaming. He crouched down to greet her, taking the picture she handed him with great seriousness. It was a new one, another sketch of their family triangle. This time, he had a bigger smile. Claire watched them carefully. She saw the way he looked at her daughter, with a warmth that didn't feel casual. It wasn't just kindness. There was something deeper beneath the surface. After Lily wandered back to her crayons, Claire poured coffee and gestured toward the small table near the window. Dan sat down, his posture easy, his eyes following the fading light outside. "You seem familiar," she said almost casually. Dan didn't look at her right away. He ran his thumb along the rim of the mug. "You ever live around here before?" He gave a small nod. "A while ago." "With someone?" His eyes met hers then. No dodge, no pretense. Just a long pause that stretched across the table like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "I used to come through," he said. "Had some family. Things got complicated." Claire leaned forward slightly. "Dan, what's your last name?" He looked down, a small exhale leaving his chest. "Graham." She swallowed. "Mike's brother." Dan nodded once. Not defensive, not surprised. Just honest. "I didn't know if you'd recognize me," he said. "It's been years. I looked different, and I wasn't sure if I should say anything. "You were at the funeral," Claire said. "I was late," he replied, "and ashamed. I didn't know what to say to you. I didn't know how to stand there and pretend like I hadn't messed everything up between me and him." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the man from the parking lot, but the younger version of Daniel who used to make Mike laugh so hard he'd cry. The one who had disappeared after the funeral and never reached out again. She stood and walked to the cupboard, pulling down a photo. It was the same one she had compared earlier. She laid it on the table. "You should have come sooner," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I'm here now." The silence that followed hung in the air between them, not heavy with anger, but with all the time that had been lost. Claire stood by the table, fingers lightly resting on the back of a chair, unsure whether she wanted to cry or simply breathe for a moment without everything crashing around her. Daniel looked older than she remembered, and not just in the lines around his eyes or the grey that had started to creep into his hair. He looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time, something too big to set down without breaking. "I left because I didn't know how to stay," he said, his voice quiet. "After Mike died, I told myself you'd be better off without me. I thought I had missed my chance to fix things with him. And being around you and Lily, it just made the guilt louder." Claire pulled out a chair and sat down. Her hands were trembling slightly. "He used to talk about you, even after the falling out. He wanted you to come back. He missed you." Daniel nodded slowly and reached into his coat pocket. He took out a folded envelope, worn at the edges, yellowed slightly from time and weather. He laid it gently on the table in front of her. "I was supposed to get this the day of the accident. It was in his truck. They found it in the glove compartment." Claire picked it up, recognizing Mike's handwriting instantly. Her breath caught as she carefully unfolded the letter. "Dan, I keep thinking about how we let things fall apart, how we let silence grow in the space where family should have been. I miss you. Lily's growing fast, and I don't want her to grow up not knowing her uncle. I want us to fix this. Please come back. Let's start over." Tears slipped down Claire's cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her mouth with one hand and closed her eyes, as if doing so would somehow let her go back and rewrite what had happened. Daniel sat still, his own eyes shining. "I should have come sooner. I read that letter over and over again. I kept telling myself I wasn't ready, and the longer I waited, the harder it got." Claire looked at him, tears still falling. "You could have called. You could have written." "I know," he said, "but I was afraid you'd hate me." "I did," she whispered, "for a long time. Not because you left, but because you never said why. Because you let me think I was alone in this." He looked down at the floor. "I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you space." Claire shook her head, her voice softer now. "We didn't need space. We needed each other." They sat in silence, the letter between them, not as a bridge to the past, but as a starting point. Lily's laughter drifted from the next room as she played with her dolls, unaware that the shape of her world was quietly shifting. "I don't want to disappear again," Daniel said. "I don't know what you want from me, or if I even deserve to ask, but I'd like to be part of her life, even if it's just as a quiet presence in the background." Claire stared at the letter, then at the man across from her. He looked like a man finally done running. "She's your family too," Claire said. "And maybe we all need a second chance." Daniel nodded, eyes glistening. "I'd like that, if you're willing." Claire reached across the table and placed her hand over the envelope. Her other hand, slowly, reached for his. "I think Mike would have wanted this," she said. Daniel gave a small, grateful smile. "I think he did." In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to return often. At first, it was under the excuse of helping with little things, fixing the broken handle on the cabinet, replacing the leaky faucet, checking the car battery again, just to be sure. Claire didn't question it. She let him in. Each visit came with fewer silences and more conversation, and though their words stayed careful at first, there was an ease growing between them that hadn't existed before. Lily took to him like she'd known him forever. She'd wait by the window some afternoons, her nose pressed to the glass, and light up when his car turned into the lot. She called him Mr. Dan, and he never corrected her. He would sit cross-legged on the floor, letting her show off her drawings or her growing collection of stickers, and he always listened like her stories were the most important thing he'd hear that day. Claire began to notice things she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. The lightness in the air when he was around, the way Lily laughed more when he was nearby, the strange comfort in knowing there was someone else who understood what had been lost. They didn't talk much about Mike, not directly, but his name floated between the lines, always present. Sometimes Claire would mention something small, like how Mike used to burn toast every Saturday morning or hum off-key in the shower. Daniel would smile and nod, finishing the memory with his own piece of the past. It was never forced. It just belonged. One night, as Claire tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up and asked if Mr. Dan was going to come back tomorrow. Claire said she wasn't sure, but Lily only smiled and said, "He always does." After Lily fell asleep, Claire stepped onto the porch where Daniel had just finished changing a porch light that had been flickering for weeks. The sky above them was a soft shade of purple, the kind that only came just after sunset. They stood side by side, quiet for a long time, watching the world settle into stillness. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if things had gone differently?" she asked. "All the time," Daniel replied. "But I also think maybe this is where I was supposed to end up." Claire looked over at him, her voice low. "Even after everything?" He nodded. "Especially after everything." They stood there for another few minutes before Claire turned toward the door. "You're welcome to stay for dinner," she said. He didn't answer right away, but when he followed her inside, she knew he had made a choice. Not just to stay for a meal, but to return, again and again, until this space no longer felt like borrowed time. Later, as Lily curled up on the couch between them, drifting off with her head resting against Daniel's arm, Claire felt something shift. Not everything was healed, and not everything would be easy. But the silence that had filled their lives for so long had started to lift. In its place was something new. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And that was enough. Spring arrived quietly, softening the edges of everything. The trees along the sidewalk outside Claire's building bloomed in pale pink, and Lily began leaving her jacket at home, insisting she wasn't cold anymore. Life had taken on a new rhythm, gentle and steady, with Daniel now a quiet fixture in their days. He never forced his presence but showed up all the same. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with stories from his construction sites that made Lily giggle, and sometimes with nothing but his time. Claire found herself laughing more, even when she didn't mean to. She noticed the difference in the way the apartment felt when he was there. The silence no longer echoed with what had been lost but held space for what was slowly returning. She had stopped bracing for him to disappear. One Saturday afternoon, they packed a picnic and drove to a nearby park. Lily ran ahead on the path, chasing butterflies with her arms outstretched. Daniel carried the blanket and the cooler while Claire walked beside him, the warmth of the sun settling on her shoulders. They found a quiet spot under an old oak tree and laid everything out. Lily plopped down in the grass and started arranging peanut butter sandwiches into shapes. Claire watched her, heart full in a way that felt new. Daniel reached into the cooler and pulled out a photo album wrapped in a cloth napkin. He handed it to her without saying anything. Claire opened it and drew in a breath. The pages held a mix of old and new. Pictures of Mike from years ago, some Claire had never seen. Daniel had written notes beneath them in careful handwriting. Beside those were recent photos, Lily in her raincoat, the three of them making cookies, Daniel holding a toolbox with Lily pretending to help. She looked up, eyes glassy. "You made this?" "I thought she should know where she comes from. All of it. Not just the hard parts." Claire flipped through more pages, her fingers brushing over images like they were pieces of memory made solid. Lily crawled over and leaned her head on Claire's shoulder, peeking at the pictures. "Uncle Dan's in a lot of these," she said with a sleepy smile. Claire looked at Daniel. His face was still, waiting. She reached over and took his hand. "I think you've earned the title." He looked down at their joined hands, then at Lily resting against her mother. "Thank you." They sat there as the sun filtered through the branches, a soft breeze rustling the pages. It wasn't a perfect picture. There were still days when grief crept in, or money ran short, or Lily asked questions Claire didn't always know how to answer. But this moment, this quiet piece of something beginning again, was real. Claire leaned her head back, letting the sunlight hit her face, and smiled without holding it in. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Claire sat on the porch steps with a warm cup of tea cradled in her hands, watching Lily and Daniel in the yard. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting long golden rays across the grass. Lily was laughing as Daniel spun her around, her arms stretched wide like wings. Claire could hear her daughter's joy echo through the quiet neighborhood, light and untangled. She smiled to herself, not because everything was perfect, but because something had shifted. The ache that used to settle behind her ribs had softened, no longer sharp. There was still sorrow, still the empty space where Mike's voice used to be, but now that space was shared. It didn't echo as loudly with grief. Daniel caught her eye and waved. She lifted her cup in return, the small gesture carrying 1,000 unsaid things. "Thank you. I see you. Don't go." Lily ran toward the steps and dropped into her mother's lap, breathless and full of sunlight. Claire kissed the top of her head and looked out at the man who had once been a stranger and now felt like something else entirely. Sometimes the road back to hope begins with a simple offer, a quiet ride, and the courage to say yes.